Hey everybody, welcome to another week of What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian. Paul Thurrott is not here with me this week. Paul is somewhere in England or France. I'm not too sure. Depending on what day you're listening, he's traveling the world as he does all the time. But instead, I'm joined by a great guest actually this week. I'm joined by Rob Greenlee from Microsoft. Rob is the manager of podcast marketplace for Windows Phone and Zune. How you doing, Rob?
Doing terrific. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to get you here because there's a lot that I want to ask you. The show will be concentrating on web streaming and the future of media distribution on the internet, as you are one person that comes across many shows as far as working for Microsoft and working for Zune and working for the podcasting division. How did you get into podcasting? Before we get into how did you get into Microsoft, because you were telling me you are a broadcaster, you've been on the radio, you were on the radio for many years, and you ventured online as the next step for you.
Yeah, actually, I just walked into a broadcast radio station back in 1999, and I was actually doing some consulting work around search engine optimization, and decided I'd go in and try and share that knowledge with a lot more people, and just started a radio show called Web Talk Guys.
How did you convince them? Because it's a tough gig to get on the radio.
Well, at the time, it was a fairly small broadcast station. I did have to pay for my airtime to get started with.
Sure.
So that's a common situation. It probably is fairly common. I'm not as much involved in the broadcast side now, but back then it was really common. You had to pay for like an hour of airtime, and I actually did it on Saturday mornings.
Okay.
And so I had a crew of folks that I brought in, and like 3 other people that I brought in to the studio, and it was really just a conversation about what was new and hot and what was going on the internet back in the early days of the web. I mean, and that was right in the middle of kind of the .com boom.
Sure.
Back in the early days, and it was kind of towards the kind of the tail end of that somewhat, because it was like 2000, 2001, things started to fall apart on that stuff, right?
How do people perceive technology? Because right now, even if you're not a enthusiast, and even if you're not a guy that's involved in this and you're reading the blogs, you are involved in technology in some way, and you do have, an iPhone, a smartphone, Android, a MacBook. I mean, 10, 12 years ago, it was a different world, and a lot of people were not as exposed to technology as they are now. How was it, going in and doing a show and almost being just this world of information for many people that they had no idea that you could do certain things?
Well, I think it was really a fascinating time from the perspective of that it was so new to everybody, and a lot of the concepts that we were talking about on our show and what was going on in the world was so speculative and so kind of unknown. It was almost like it was a little bit surreal in a way back then, because nobody really knew how this thing was going to play out and how popular it was going to get. So it was really kind of a novelty thing back then, but there was really a lot of fascination about it. There was a lot of portrayals of it in movies and TV shows and stuff in kind of this mystical way, so it had a real mystique around it back then.
Sure.
It's quite different than it is now, where it's like everybody just takes it for granted that it's there. But back then it was like, it was like this new frontier, and people were really fascinated by it. And you don't see a lot of broadcast radio shows now that talk about the web and the internet anymore. And it's because, it's kind of like it's become almost like a telephone now, right? It's not something people necessarily really talk about in the same way that they did back in the early 2000s, where it was so new to so many people.
I'm just interested to see how it's going to evolve in another 10 years, because the last 10 years has been unbelievable. If you look at what we are able to do now compared to what we were able to do 10, 12 years ago, people are still communicating with NetMeeting 12, 13 years ago. And you look at what we're doing now, we're doing Skype, and it's a huge evolution as far as the technology goes. At what point did you venture in online and you said, I'm going to start doing this thing? I don't even think it was called podcasting at that point. I guess it was internet broadcasting.
Yeah, I was actually, all I did was take an audio file that was recorded in the broadcast studio, take it home and make it an MP3, and then post a link to it on my website. That's the extent of it back then. But back then, that was kind of a novel thing. I mean, to go to a page on the web and to click download, an audio file and be able to play it on your computer, or actually what was really big back then, which really plays a lot into what's going on now, is that I delivered my show mostly through streaming. So I had, like a Windows Media Server, and I had a real server that actually streamed my show at like 15, 16K.
Yeah, RM files for streaming. There was some of, if you were lucky, if you got like 32K.
Yeah, exactly. Because people just didn't get that much bandwidth. I mean, there was a lot of people going online just with dial-up at 28.8, and it was just, people had a hard time getting enough bandwidth to be able to get multimedia. So you really had to deliver it to them in drips, not in big bursts. So that's why we had to kind of tone it down from a bandwidth side of things.
We've had this discussion a bunch of times on the air with multiple people and multiple guests, and we've always discussed, how much bandwidth came into play at that point. And being in New York, I was very lucky to be one of the first testing markets for DSL. So we had DSL here in New York in 96, 97. We had very, very good DSL speeds. And that's in the early days. But for most people in this country, they were still on 36.6 and 28.8 and 56K standard dial-up. Yeah. So it had to have been an extremely difficult thing. But did you notice that people were going and downloading, and were you surprised that people were actually sitting there and streaming and downloading the show from a website, coming, as far as being on the radio and being so disconnected with your audience in a sense?
Well, I think it was really kind of a new concept. I mean, I saw a lot of growth in people doing that from 2000 through, 2005 or so, just prior to podcasting started. I mean, it was really a novel thing, and there was only maybe a handful of radio shows that were actually doing that back then.
And so, who knows how many of them were allowed? That's another thing that came into play too, right?
Well, I think a lot of people just hadn't thought of the idea yet. I mean, the web was so new, and people just didn't think that you could get multimedia. I think that's what was really novel about, Reel back in those days, was that they were basically pioneering this whole area of streaming using the internet, and it just wasn't something people thought about was realistic to do because of the current bandwidth. And so when they came out with these streaming servers, it really opened the door to this whole other use of the web and the internet that people really hadn't thought about. So it gradually grew, and I would say, looking back on it, I got probably 90% of my audience came through streaming.
That's amazing.
So, and I think that there's a lot of correlation in learning to what we saw back then to what we're seeing now. And obviously we can talk about that more later, but.
Yeah, we are definitely going to talk about it because you have seen all sides of this, and that's the amazing thing about it. So now the early 2000s, you're online and you're broadcasting online, and you do have a radio show. What year do you decide to go online and just do it online?
Well, that actually happened about the timing of when podcasting actually started.
So at about 2005.
Yeah, exactly. It was really kind of a time when I decided to kind of move away from kind of the broadcast side, because it was just such a cumbersome thing to work with. I had to actually pay for my hour, and then back then I was actually on 15 other broadcast stations as well through satellite, and then I was on the XM satellite network also through a deal that I had with CNET.
Yeah.
The tech network in San Francisco, because back then they owned 2 broadcast stations also, and we're doing a lot of broadcast radio as well. It was kind of just prior and about the same time frame that they were starting to do podcasting, in that same kind of window. CNET was really a pioneer in this stuff as well. But as far as my show, I was actually the first broadcast radio show to actually start podcasting. So it was really kind of an interesting thing. There was a lot of shows that started up just as a podcast, but very few had actually made that jump between being a broadcast show and being a podcast.
Yeah, we've had a couple radio people on. Leslie Gold is a good friend of ours, and it's a different mindset, I think, for many traditional broadcasters when they almost see it as, why am I giving this away for free when I could tell them to watch or listen to my show? And they were counting their Arbitron, they're counting their people meter. So it was a different world at that point, prior to realizing that you could actually make money if you put the show online.
Yeah. Well, I think in the early days, though, if you really look at the radio, just from a technical perspective, they just were not very web savvy, and I don't think that they even thought it was a significant thing for them to get involved in back then. I mean, they had no idea. And actually, even if you look at them today, they're many broadcast stations are really kind of still in that kind of early 2000 timeframe and how they think about the web.
Sure. I mean, the fact that there are, I'm a big radio buff, Rob, and I've always been so fascinated by the radio industry and everything they've done, and that's really what made me get into this. But if you look at the way that they distribute some of their content on the radio, one example is you won't air your morning guy on your internet feed. So what you'll do is you'll block them out and you'll air music for that time frame. So you drive people to listen to the radio. And to me, that's a little bit of a backwards way of doing things because you want to appeal to as many people as possible. You don't want to just appeal to one market.
Yeah.
But many stations don't see it that way.
Well, and I think a lot of local stations, I mean, and that's what most of these stations are only concerned about reaching their local markets. So that was always the kind of tug of war that they were playing was, okay, if we put this online, I mean, how many people are we really going to get listening to this in our local market? Because they're selling ads from companies that are in their local market. So, so you had this natural kind of tug of war between, well, we don't really get a financial benefit by making our show available to somebody in New York City when our radio station's in Seattle, So it's not like they're selling ads or they're able to even monetize that audience that may be coming out of New York back in those days. So they never really saw it as a benefit to their financial side of their station.
Which is very interesting. So now podcasting has kind of erupted in 2005. That's when I guess the terms. When did the term get coined? I mean, when did they start calling it a podcast rather than just an internet broadcast or whatever else?
Yeah, that all actually really kind of kicked off in the summer of 2004 is when it really kicked off. There was an article that appeared in the Guardian, I think was the newspaper, out of the UK, and it had an article about how more and more radio shows were making their show, available. I mean, like ours. I mean, back in those days. Mm-hmm. And I had just had the author of that article on my show like a week before he wrote this article, and in the article he listed about three or four possible names of what this kind of downloadable radio show kind of concept was, and one of them happened to be podcasting.
What were the other two? Do you remember?
It was like I think one was the audio blog. I think was one. Blog casting, I think, was another one.
I think podcasting is better.
Well, it is, but what's really kind of funny about it is back then. A lot of the folks that were involved in podcasting as you kind of rolled into 2005, most of the pioneers didn't like the name. I think it's kind of an unknown, to a certain extent, kind of unknown to a lot of people today. But when podcasting started, it was a very unpopular name to content providers.
Why not just call it internet broadcasting?
Well, if you look at what a guy like Leo Laporte thought, he's been out there pushing the whole concept of netcasting.
Yeah.
And that's an example of what I'm talking about how the early days, the broadcasters or the people that were getting involved in podcasting like Leo were kind of against that name because it's definitely a name that was associated with a specific distribution platform or a player device. And if you look at it from the long term, and I think as things have played out, I think that that kind of association wasn't really beneficial to what's happened to podcasting, and we can talk about more of that.
I want to lead into that because podcasting, and I never saw it this way, but I'm starting to see it now, and it's a strange thing to say, but as someone that started off in the podcasting, world, and I ended up doing live broadcasting, and I still do a podcast, but it's almost become a dirty word for a bigger name. And I'm not saying me, I'm saying, a legitimate broadcaster entering into the online market or stand-up that's very successful for it. They embraced the podcasting, and then I've noticed they kind of pulled back from the term podcasting. In a sense that it almost means, and this is what one guy told me, I don't want to name his name, but he said it's when you say a podcast, it's almost like anybody could do it. So people don't take you serious.
Yep.
So people stop using that term.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the downside of it, I think, is a perception that it's low quality content.
Which it's not. I mean, it's far from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the full spectrum, right? It's got the most professional stuff in the world, and it's got stuff that isn't, and it's okay. That's what's always been talked about as far as the long tail content. So it's been okay that it's not like that, but it has over time, I think, given people kind of a negative impression of it somewhat. Maybe not all that kind of thoughtful, but people tend to be kind of polarized on things these days. And I think it's really, and I've heard, the terms like podcast ghetto and things like that thrown out there too. And what does the term podcast really mean to anybody either? I think, unfortunately, it's been linked up with a type of content. And I think most people don't think about it properly. Podcasts as a term was to describe how a person would get a particular media file, not a description of a particular kind of content.
And what do you mean by that? Where does the word pod come into play? Does it have to do with the fact that you're grabbing it from an RSS?
Yeah.
Is that where it got coined from?
Yeah, that's what the foundation of it was, an automated subscription and delivery to a portable media player. It had nothing to do with what the actual content is, right? So, but people use it. I mean, a good example of what I'm talking about is people describe various shows to be live podcasts, right?
Yeah.
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you.
But that's part of what I'm talking about, is that everybody has a perception that podcast means something different, right?
Sure.
And it doesn't really stand as a term that people really can even understand because it's so confusing. So I'm actually pushing for us to move beyond the term into a new term. But part of the reason why I feel that way is because I'm starting to see a lot of the same trends that I saw back in the early 2000s, which is people wanting to get content on demand, streaming.
Mm-hmm. Are you referring to live content, or are you referring to just?
Doesn't matter if it's live or on demand. It's the instant gratification situation. It takes time to download something and then to play it back, right? People just want to click play.
And I agree with you 100%, and I wish you could tell this to our advertisers. Yeah, because this has been a struggle for us. Majority of our viewership comes from, whether or not we're live, but comes from our live feeds from Justin TV, Ustream, Stickam, our audio feed, and live stream, or occasionally when it's working, when we have the feed up and running. It's a whole issue. But majority of our viewers comes from there. But when you're selling an ad and you're selling a show to somebody, they want to see those downloads. They want to see subscribers. They want to know how many people are listening on iTunes. They want to know how many people are listening on Zune. They want to know how many people are on your feed burner. And it's a very difficult thing for me to tell them at this point that it's hard for me to convince my viewers, listen, rather than watching this content that I'm airing all the time, and you could tune in at any time and interact with any viewer in the chat room. We have, 40 or 50 people in the chat. I want you to go get this software, install the software, subscribe to it, then remember to watch it.
Yeah.
It's a different time, and I think a lot, and people still do it. We have unbelievable subscriber numbers for the show. Paul Thorod has been a huge help for us here, but it's still, compared to our live numbers, it's nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a sign of how things are changing, and I think the concept of downloading before you play will always have a place. It's just becoming less and less important to do that because of the bandwidth that we can all get, via wireless networks. There's less of a need for us to store and play back because of that ubiquitous bandwidth. Now, granted, I mean, like I said, we still need to be enabled to download, but I think over time we're going to see more monetization opportunities around streaming because there's usually better ways of being able to embed ads. There's better ways of tracking. I think if you see the overall success of streaming platforms, they're a lot easier to monetize, and you're seeing more and more CDNs moving that direction and not doing the whole download thing quite as much. And it's because there's monetization models around streaming that just don't exist as easily with the traditional download podcast model.
I mean, I've heard people say that the bubble, it's popped and in podcasting, and it's not a dominant force anymore, and you're not attracting the viewers that you might have quite a couple years ago. I think what they say the peak was 2007, 2008, right, for podcasting. That's when it was at its all-time high for many, many people.
Correct.
And a number of broadcasters that I've spoken to that do this, and they are very successful at it, say, they still have a great turnout, but they're not getting those they're not getting those subscribers, they're not getting those people that hit and listen to the show as much as they did in 2007, 2008. And these are people that have not adapted to live streaming and live broadcasts.
Well, it's because the stats that I see in the research is that fewer people are subscribing to anything. They're just going in and getting the content that they want, because a lot of these platforms, and Zune is an example of this, as well as iTunes, people have been trained by these platforms to go in and just select and download. And this whole concept of subscribing to a feed or to content, it is just not something that people really understand or see a value in doing when they can just go directly in and get the episode that they want and move on.
Once again, I want to remind our viewers, I'm joined by Rob Greenlee, manager of Podcast Marketplace for Windows Phone and Zune. Very informed guy about podcasting, where the industry is going, and you work with many of our podcasters and internet broadcasters. Mm-hmm. Over the last couple of years that you've been doing this, what has been the biggest trend? Personally, I have noticed that more people are watching the downloaded videos, which I'm really surprised at. Mm-hmm. What is some trends that you've noticed as far as where this is going and how people are changing in a way compared to the early days?
Well, I think it's going to three things really are going on. The quality of all shows and video and audio are getting better all the time. It's becoming really a professional platform. It's just the perception of it is not there, but I think over time it will be. But I think by then the whole thing is going to have changed. Then the other big trend is how this content is being consumed. I think phones are really important. I think TVs are going to be really, really an important area for the video side, and cars. I think cars are the other big piece of where people are going to consume this content. And I think I've given you an example of kind of the video and the audio side. The actual phone itself will be a video and audio kind of portal to content, where the car will be audio, and then your TV will be primarily video. So I think that's the trend. I think if you look at the overall growth of numbers of how content is being consumed and where the growth is, it's clearly on the video side is moving towards the larger screen playback.
I mean, absolutely. With these devices like Roku and almost all these streaming Boxy Box, and even with the latest announcement, which I don't want to really go into too much, but the latest announcement of Microsoft and how they're going to push video content with the providers on their Xbox 360, it seems that more and more of these set-top boxes are saying, let's give online media a chance. It doesn't need to be the networks all the time. It doesn't need to be a show that's getting millions of people on a channel that gets millions of people every week. Let's go to someone like Revision 3 and Leo Laporte and even us. I mean, we have partnership agreements with a couple of these guys. Let's put them on to see how that does. And it seems like there's more leniency if you try something and you fail at it. You could kind of pull back rather than signing a multi-million-dollar partnership deal with some network. It seems like it's a little bit, the risk isn't as much, and I think the opportunity is there for many of us. I've always been fascinated because we have it on the TV, right? You could put on any one of these boxes that I described and get my show on there. You could get any other show on there. You could get it in your on your computer, but the car is still the missing link. I feel that the technology has not reached for the car.
Yeah.
I've always said 5 years, and this was when I started about 3 years ago, so I'm hoping there's 2 years, so I don't seem wrong. But I've always said there's a couple more years we need to get this technology going in the car.
Well, you got to keep in mind with the car that the lead times are huge there, and to have a car that has kind of like a built-in PC or computer in it is something that I think it's coming, and it will be able to be upgraded via software update, just like a laptop or a phone is today.
I had put a laptop in my trunk, and I had connected it to the DVD set in my car years ago.
Yeah,
it ended up overheating and dying, but I had attempted it.
Well, yeah, and I think that to a certain extent, you kind of have these two things going on with the car. You have the embedded stuff that's in the head unit of the car that's coming, and I think more and more as our phones get smarter and more powerful, they become kind of the conduit for the computing in the car as well. So I think you've kind of got this dual track going on, but clearly apps and additional multimedia capability are coming more and more to the car. But you also have to keep in mind that there's a lot of car manufacturers and the government that are really concerned about putting too much multimedia in the car because it's such a big distraction.
Yeah.
So I think that the big thing that needs to be addressed and will be addressed, I think, over time is the usability of audio content in the car that comes from the internet. So I think there's just a lot better ways of controlling media that comes out of either a smartphone or a head unit that needs to be optimized better for people to be safer consuming a lot of online media in their cars, and not video while they're driving, but at least the audio side, because there's so much content now that you can get access to online that should be available in the car. So
how do you see the adaptation of this with I'm sorry, I had like an echo in my head. How do you see the adaptation with internet media and internet audio streams in the car as compared to what happened with satellite radio? I do have satellite radio. I do own stock in Sirius, and I was very hopeful that this would have been the next step as far as broadcasting goes. I really thought this would be a great opportunity for many broadcasters out there that were getting laid off at the time, and they were going to Jack FM type formats in the stations, and I was really hopeful that we will see personalities, but due to the economy and the struggles of the expense of maintaining this technology, which was, it was a total shame because I was really hoping that this would be it. Do you see it being an easier transition for internet media and internet content, internet broadcast to be implemented into the car? Because satellite radio, as far as many people are concerned, was not a total success, even though they have 20-something million subscribers. But to many people, it is not a technology that will survive the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think the main reason for that is that it's satellite radio is really not any different than broadcast radio. So, as far as Now, granted, they've done some things that are a little bit better. There's more selection there, but I think that over time, what we're going to find is that satellite radio is built on the same kind of ideology as broadcast that people are turning away from more and more. And so as you kind of open up that door to content like podcasts and other streaming shows that I think are going to come into play, where the user is more in control. And if you think about how apps work today, right, you can almost create an a la carte experience in your car of stuff that you want. And to a certain extent, I think it's a generational thing too. I think a lot of people from an older side of the fence still use the radio, but I think as you look into the future and you think about kind of the new generation that's coming in, that all they know about is apps on their phone, and in a lot of other types of player devices, on their TVs. People are going to think about content as an a la carte thing more and more. And that's what's going to wind up happening in the car. In a satellite radio kind of thing, I think we'll probably still have a place, but it's still too limited in its content selection, and it's more in the broadcast radio model and how they actually package and deliver the content that they have. And I think people are just not as inclined to, it's not as personalized. And I think that's kind of where things are really going, I think.
So you think personalized content in the sense of, I could almost have, I think people still have that perception of it, and it'll take time to break that. You keep a channel on, and that's what you listen to. For many people, they're loyal to that station, even if it's not something that they would listen to outside of the car, but they leave it on. And I think that affected radio tremendously when many broadcasters went online. They realized they don't have that reach as they did when they were in the car. Many markets don't have too much competition. Many times you're stuck in a car for 45 minutes, and that's what you listen to. And Arbitron was... when it went from Arbitron to People Meter, we also saw the same issue happen. But with online, it's a direct... It's direct, right? There's no... how many people are listening at that time. There's no... At this hour, it was this many, and maybe it was this many, but it was because of this. It's very direct, and you know exactly what's happening. Yep. Do you... Now, to stay with the car topic, do you feel... Who do you feel that should be the driving forces? Do you think it's in the hands of the car manufacturers? Do you feel that it's in the hands of the internet service providers that you're kind of piggybacking on to get this content? What things have to happen so this becomes the go-to? Of course, we'll have FM and AM and satellite, but what things have to happen to make this happen?
Well, I think it's very similar to what we've seen happen with phones. I mean, I think it's going to be a combination of software folks, companies like this company, and there's also going to be other software companies that actually build software for cars. And I think a certain amount, like Ford and with their Ford Sync product, work in partnership,
which is a phenomenal product. I just experienced it in one of my friends' brand new Fords, and I was so amazed on how good it is and how well it works. Yeah. And it's sometimes in a car, we have these great things in front of us when we're sitting in the office, but when we're in a car, you don't expect such a high quality piece of software. It's almost like, the standard set-top box you get from the cable company. It's not the greatest piece of software, but in the Ford, it's a great piece of software.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're going to see more of here. And I think as we move more into electric vehicles, there's going to be a lot more technology that's going to be kind of put out there through that kind of evolution that we're starting to see happen. I actually own a Nissan Leaf myself and been driving that for four or 5 months now. And that car has a lot of technology in it. It's got Windows embedded in it, is what actually operates the core heart of the Windows Leaf.
It's Windows CE? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is. But it's full of technology. It's got an always, you're always connected to the internet in that car. So, for navigation purposes and data to the car, you can subscribe to feeds to the car itself, and the car will read the feeds to you. And so we're going to see more and more of this. And I think that your car is going to become an important place for you to consume audio content going forward. And it's just going to take time. And like I said earlier, the generational thing, as well as a car manufacturer thing, where they see an audience for these things, and they get people buying the cars that actually want this capability more and more. And it's just going to take time. And I think, your 3 to 5 year range is probably reasonable before we start to see really advanced technology in the car that will enable the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
I'm hopeful that it kind of stays, because it stays to its core, as far as the fact that we are going to see many people that are not mainstream celebrities that are coming up and becoming successful. We have, YouTube has been great for that, to creating online celebrities and online media creators that do unbelievable. I was just looking at a video of Hannah Hart, I believe her last name is, from My Drunk Kitchen, and she's become a huge success because of the video she's putting on YouTube, and that would not have been possible if it wasn't for outlets like YouTube and the podcasting outlet that Zune provides, which we're on, by the way.
Yep.
And because I bug you all the time, telling you, hey, can you change this for me? And it's been great for us. So to move on to that, do you feel that it's necessary to have these distribution methods like Zune, like iTunes, like YouTube, to kind of survive and to kind of be elevated into the next level, or can you still do it on your own via RSS? And the reason why I bring that up is you had a very interesting conversation on your show, and it was a show from 2005, and you sent me the link, and I was listening, and I was in awe, because some of the things that you're talking about are still a very important aspect of broadcasting online.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, it's really not as relevant as it used to be. One thing that comes in mind is the RSS. The RSS still plays a huge role in subscriptions and getting your content out there. But you could kind of survive without having anybody subscribe to your RSS and have it exclusively on, the Zune or on iTunes.
Yeah.
Do you feel that we are going to kind of eliminate how we perceive the RSS and perceive the information on your website and go exclusively to content providers?
Well, I think
content distributors.
Yeah, I think that really needs to happen, and I think that it's been too slow to happen. I think the days of cutting and pasting an RSS feed into a piece of software, I think, is hopefully is dying. I mean, I don't really want to see that for too much longer. I mean, I think that there's a lot of folks that kind of love that flexibility, and in a lot of ways, it's kind of a mainstay right now that people are doing that. But I do think that people are doing it less and less, and I think as we kind of go mass medium with this whole kind of online stuff, that most users, especially, I think if we want to attract more women to be podcasters and podcast consumers, I think we have to take the geek out of it as much as possible.
And that's a very interesting thing you said. We were at Blog World, and you're going to be at Blog World in about a month. We were at Blog World in New York, and I was speaking to Rick, the guy that put it all together, and we were discussing how he wishes that more women would be involved in this. And he said that at times it's a very uninviting place because it seems like a boys' club. And when he found out that my wife also co-hosts with me, my wife does a show, he was very interested to know how she perceives the internet broadcasting world and what she feels is going on and with, I guess with the trends and everything. But it's a very important thing. That's a missing thing. There's only a handful of women really doing this.
Yeah. Actually, my wife actually did my show with me since day one.
That's amazing.
She's been she was a co-host on the show, and it was a very important piece to have her there. I mean, I think to appeal to a broader audience, you can't just be a boys' club. You have to, really include all ways of thinking about this stuff, because women bring a different perspective than guys do, and I know that's nothing really new, but it really is important, I think, in this area. And I've been really, really supportive of any women that want to get involved in podcasting and get involved in making content in this area, because I think it's really important for the long term that we see more of that, and we have been seeing more of it here over the last few years, and I'm really encouraged by it. But I think it needs to get easier to do, so we see more of them come in here and contribute, because I think it's really important to the long-term growth of this medium, whether it is podcasting or not. I mean, I think that over time, I think the term podcast is going to continue to fade, and it's going to be replaced by something else, or it's going to be not even thought of as podcasting. It's just going to be online video or online audio. And I think that that's just the long-term direction of this. It's not going to matter that it's a download or a stream. It's always going to be there, and it's going to be integrated into software and player devices and phones and computers and all sorts of places, constantly around us, because it'll be so easy to do that.
Yeah. So you're speaking at Blog World this year, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it, and you're delivering. I guess it's a speech, a keynote. I did that last year in New York, and it was very interesting meeting so many people there that have the same questions. Everybody's looking for the same answers, and it was a great thing to meet so many people there. What are you speaking on?
Well, actually, it's not a keynote. It's just a panel, and the panel is Podcasting Next, Fly or Die.
Okay.
And that's the title of it. And the reason that I'm throwing that out there is because we need to talk about what's next for podcasting. And is what's next going to fly, or is it going to fade away? And I think that's a very important question. I'm not saying that podcasting as a content side of things is going to fade away. It's only going to continue to grow. But to use the term podcast to describe what we do here is becoming less and less relevant to what it is.
I call it internet broadcasting.
Yeah.
And that's what it is to me. But to many people, they kind of like the term podcasting.
Well, they do, and it's a very well-known name, and it's gonna take a while to evolve into something else. But I think at the end of the day, I think podcasting is going to go the way of the term blogging. Yeah. On the long term, and it's just not going to be something people talk about or even share, or that's what it is. It's just going to be online video or netcasting, or just like what you were just talking about. This thing is going to change.
Now, since we're on the topic of Blog World, I did want to link something back to it. When I was at Blog World, the main question I got, or the main comment I got from people is, I've been doing this for 2 years. I have 10 or 15 people that watch. What can I do to get more viewers? What can I do to attract more people? And I can't tell you how many people came up and asked the same question. And the only thing I could really tell them, other than, listen, you got to work on the SEO, the RSS, you got to get out there. I mean, the standards. But a lot of it has to do with luck as well, luck and talent.
Well, I think a lot of it is talent, and I think it's your ability to have an interesting conversation with your audience and really connect. And I think it also gets back to how you package your shows. I think it's really important to have a really, really good artwork, cover art, and I'm starting to lose my voice. Excuse me. So when you just need to do a really good job of telling your audience or your future audience what your show's about, what they're going to get from it, and deliver on that. And I think that's really, really important. And regularly updating your art is also another important thing to do. Make sure your art communicates what your show is about, because the artwork is really the first thing that a new audience person sees on an aggregator platform. I'm not necessarily saying that would be the case on a website or in other places online, but clearly in like iTunes or Zune or any app aggregator on your phone, That's the first thing that people see. And so that artwork needs to pop with them. It needs to look professional, and it needs to deliver a quick message of what the show's about. And hopefully that'll connect with their interest to click on and give it a try.
That's actually very, very interesting thing you're saying. A couple of our shows, we changed the artwork around a couple months ago, and they weren't doing as well as we thought they would. As soon as we changed the artwork, it got a lot more viewers. So that does play a huge factor in getting it out there. I guess that's the total package, right? There's in order to attract someone and have zero celebrityhood, you have to be doing a lot of out of the 10 steps, let's just say there are 10 steps, you have to be doing at least 8 of them correctly to get people to be attracted. Now, with that said, what are some things that you have noticed or you have seen or people have spoken to you about that it's a common mistake that many internet broadcasters do or podcasters do?
Well, I think it's really not do a good job with your kind of your presentation of your show. I think that's the biggest piece, and making sure that you've covered all of your bases. Your feeds are coded correctly. You've got good descriptions, just like what I just said. Your cover art, but your audio file or your video file needs to be well produced, and it needs to be really kind of clear about what the audience is going to get right up front, and really deliver on that and really focus on that. Now, granted, a lot of shows out there are doing this kind of this, you just turn on the mic and start talking. And I think that just based on my own experience in creating content is that the audience has an expectation of what they're going to get from your show, right? When they subscribe, and what benefit or what value are you delivering to your audience? And I think at the end of the day, I mean, if it's comedy, if it's humor, if it's facts, if it's whatever it is, that audience feels like they need to get something out of it.
Yeah.
No, and I think that the whole celebrity factor, I think, is kind of a little bit of a opportunity for those that have it, or maybe they can skate on those issues a little bit and not focus on them as much because people just are fascinated by any word that comes out of their mouth. But if you're not a celebrity, I think you need to really focus on making up for that fact that you're not a celebrity and start delivering some really good value to your audience.
I always say there's no special trick you could do and out of nowhere, you have, oh, look, 5,000 people tuned in today. There's nothing you could do like that. It's many things that come into play, and that's what my speech was about, that you have to implement all these steps in order for it to work.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't work tomorrow, you can't be discouraged and give up, because many people, and I read a stat somewhere that said the average lifespan of a podcast is 22 episodes.
I'm surprised it was that many.
And I don't know if that was if who knows how factual that is, but a half a year, 6 months is a long time to do something and not see huge results. And I think a lot of people, they give up after that and they say, well, this isn't going to work, or I'm going to try something else, or I'll come back to it and I'll stop doing it. But I don't think that's the right way of doing it either. I think you have to be connected to your audience in the sense where you know what they like and you know what they dislike, and you have to kind of change what you're doing to cater to more people, or cater to, the people you want to cater to.
And it's hard. It's sometimes hard to do that too, because you can only be who you are, right?
Yeah.
You can't necessarily be somebody different than you are. I mean, you can't just one day decide that you're going to be an Adam Carolla. It's something that you need to really focus on who you are and what value can you bring to somebody that is listening to you. So it's a challenge, and I totally agree with you that there's a lot of things that you need to think about if you want to do this and be successful at it. I mean, you need to get involved in the social networks, you need to blog, you need to get out there and comment on other people's blog posts, you need to get on other people's podcasts. There's just a lot of things that you need to do to get your name out there and get known and become an expert in your particular area. and if it's just being funny and having a good time on your show, you need to be good at doing that.
And see, I think one of the stranger aspects of what we do here is the fact that we do 11 different shows, and each show is totally different than the next. So we have a comedy show, we have an automotive show, we have 2 tech shows, we have a hair loss show. So we cater to as much as we can. And I've noticed that there is a huge crossover audience because they become loyal to your product.
Yep.
And that's been one of the things that we've done is, we don't want to just become a tech network, because I think that there's so many great tech broadcasters out there. I mean, Leo Laporte, let's bring him up again. He's one of the most successful online broadcasters to date. And there's no way I could ever compete with that level, because he is just, he's been doing this for 30 years. So we try to target different areas of this online media that has not been that has not been hit yet. And I'm getting an echo at the end, so I don't know what's happening. What advice can you give? I mean, if somebody comes to you and says, Rob, I really want to get into this, what do you think I could do? And the guy has a talent. What can I do to get more viewers? You think it's a whole blend of social networking and just doing the right thing, pretty much.
Yeah, I think it's like really any other business that you start. You build over time of consistency and being regular. And in reality, half of your success is just going to come from consistency and being there and doing it on a regular basis, because audiences tune into people that are consistent. And I think that's the big thing that you have going here, with your network, is that you are consistent and you have a consistent quality to what you do, that the audience, when they tune in, they know they're going to get that, right? And then over time, as they become more familiar with you and more familiar with your hosts, they become almost like friends, and that will keep them tuning in as well. So you have to think about them as being almost like a friend, and being there for them on a consistent basis. I don't know how many times that I got an email from a listener that would say that my show was too short or too long because it caused a problem for him. That person had like a 45-minute work commute, and he wanted to listen during his full commute, right? Yeah. And if my show was too short, then he couldn't listen to the whole show during his whole commute, or if it was too long, he didn't have time to listen to the whole thing, and it was frustrating to him. So you're really you're making a personal connection with that audience member, and that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, like it or not, you're going to hear something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great, and really the other thing that I learned too is topics are important, and it really doesn't matter. Well, it does matter a little bit, but controversial topics are okay as long as they're not somehow offensive, right? But I had some topics on that generated a lot of mail that were like bashing us for talking to like PETA or something like that. People for the ethical treatment of animals, and how they're viewed as kind of like a terrorist organization of sorts. And it was really interesting to see the audience reaction to that piece. I mean, you had people on both sides of the issue. It was very much like a political debate, right? It was like people felt very strongly about protecting animals, and then there's others that are hunters and they want to go out and kill animals, right? So you kind of have this yin and yang going on, but that's the kind of dynamic that is also can be very healthy for a talk show, is to be controversial and to raise important topics.
I think you're absolutely right in that sense. But here's where some of the issue lies with that, and we get that on What the Tech is not one of the most controversial shows we have on the network, but we do have my show, which is more of a comedy-based show, and we have the Friday call-in show, which is people just calling in complaining about life, and we do talk about the news and certain topics. And I've noticed that no matter what you talk, you're always going to upset somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
But and I love to get those emails telling me why I'm wrong, but tell me why I'm wrong in a way that it educates me into why they see certain things. But majority of those emails are, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot, and it's over beyond that, and they shut out. And you have to take that risk sometimes. And those people never come back, but you have to take that risk to say, you know what, I'll lose a couple people here and there, but I'll gain the interest of 30 or 40 or whatever, 100, whatever it is. So
yeah,
I
but
think
if you're consistent with them, though, even though they're upset at you during that time, they'll tone down and they'll tune in next week to hear that next controversial topic that you might want to talk about, and they'll bash you again. I mean, people are kind of like that. They like to get stimulated with topics, and you may think that they tune out, but I'm not necessarily sure that they will in the long run. I think, if they had a connection with you at that level, they'll be back to check you out again.
It's amazing how you're able to reach so many people, and that's one of the aspects that has amazed me, that we get emails from people in Lebanon and people in all around Europe and in Russia. We got an email from someone in Australia the last week. I mean, you're attracting so many people that you normally wouldn't with any type of other media.
And I've seen a real strong growth here over the last few months from people tuning in from China.
Oh, you're noticing that people are tuning in. Wow, that's interesting.
So,
well, they are opening up more and more.
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, that as those 1.3 billion people in China get online, they're starting to consume online media just like we have in the U.S. for a decade now.
And that's an untapped resource for many technology companies.
Yeah, it's a huge potential audience, and probably more and more of those people are speaking English too.
It's a very interesting dynamic, and it's going to change over the years. And I would love to keep having you come back every couple months to discuss what's changed with the way that online media is distributed. Do you feel that? And to wrap it up, I had a couple more questions that actually viewers are sending me, and that's the great part of community. Do you feel that it's important to do you feel that someone could do it on their own, or they need to use one of these distribution serving sites, the ones that you pay for and they host it for you?
Oh, like a Libsyn or
like
something?
Like a Libsyn, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you want to start your own show, I think it's really helpful to work with a platform that has a history with podcasting and has the proper tools to do it properly. Because if you don't, then there's downsides. You're going to miss opportunities. It's not going to be reliable for your audience, and that's really, really important. So I think it is important to have the proper tools to be able to do this correctly, and because there is a lot of kind of technical things that you could get caught up in if you're not using these kind of well-oiled machines that have been around a long time.
Give me an example. What can happen? I mean, if I'm starting out, what are the perks other than the hosting and the RSS creation?
Well, you may not know that you need to have certain things in your RSS feed for it to work on all the platforms. And if you are out there coding your own feed and you happen to look at the wrong website that gives you tips on what you need to have a formatted feed, you could get it wrong. And when you submit your feed to iTunes or Zune or whatever, you're missing things that you need to best fit and be optimized on that platform. So I think those are things that those, Podbean and Libsyn and those type of platforms have been around long enough where they've optimized their experiences to make sure that all those things are covered.
It's excellent. I'm checking them out now, and I was on one of these guys, and it wasn't Podbean or Libsyn. It was another one, and it was a very sticky situation where they kind of strong arm me, and we had a near almost like an advertising deal with them where they were hosting it for us.
Oh, okay.
And they kind of turned around and said, listen, we're not going to do that, and you're going to pay us X amount every month. And the amount was so ridiculous, there was no way that we could do it. So we had to actually pack up and leave. It's about a year ago. And we had to kill the RSS because they wouldn't transfer anything over for us. It was just, we had to start fresh.
Yeah.
And we had that awful taste in our mouth from that experience. So we do it on our own, but it is a very difficult thing to do it on your own. There are many more steps you need to do, but there are great services like Libsyn and I think is Wizard Libsyn now or no?
Yeah, it's
okay.
One and the same.
Okay, and they do a great job at it.
They have a kind of a more professional service called Libsyn Pro, which is what this company uses for our own podcasts. So we actually use it's more of a professional kind of advertising type kind of platform that you can use to publish podcasts.
Excellent, Rob. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It was very informative, and many of our viewers they've been asking me to do a show discussing the topic of live broadcasting online and broadcasting on the internet and what they could do. And I'm sure many of them have learned great stuff from this talk. To close it off, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what do you think is going to happen to live broadcasting and internet broadcasting with average people, not the celebrity? Where do you see it going?
Well, I think that's really, really hard to predict right now. But I think just kind of if you look at the overall trends of what's happening, I think we're going to, and it kind of depends on the scope of what you're looking for here. But live broadcasting using the web and the internet is going to continue to grow, and it's going to become a much bigger thing than even it is today. Though I think that there's some challenges that kind of are inherent in live broadcasting that will limit its success. I still think that on demand will still rule the day just because of convenience. So I think that the whole live thing is really a way to better connect with your audience, and I think that's the real value that is there. And then the on-demand piece is just getting access to that on an anytime basis, and from really any device. But I also think that the live broadcasting thing will also be an any device consumption kind of phenomenon too. I think you'll be able to get live shows on your phones and on your slates and on your tablets and on your TV, and I think just about anybody is going to be able to do that. But I think that over time, and what we've seen is that quality is what rules the day, and so people will have a perception of your show based on how it's produced and what the value is, and all the same things that have driven the success of content up to this point will continue. So people are going to have to. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face before us with this is discovery, and I'm not sure that we've really figured that one out yet about what's the best way for people to discover and find online content, video and audio, and what's the kind of user experience? Is it a search engine? Is it some sort of personalization? I'm not sure that model has really been figured out yet. And though I'm a little scared of personalization from the standpoint of being too limited in what I'm exposed to, as far as, if I go into software and I select, well, I want it, everything that's associated with sports and politics, that's all I'm going to get, right?
Yeah.
So that's the danger of that. So do we want to have a discovery experience that's more open to other types of genres as well? So I think that's really, really the big thing. I think broadcast TV has had this whole discovery thing kind of locked down because you watch one show and they're constantly promoting other shows across that network, right? So you're always exposed to new content all the time. But when there's 10 billion shows out there, how do you discover that stuff? I think that's a nut that I'm not sure that anybody really has a good handle on yet.
Yeah, and we're going to see. It's a very interesting world of internet broadcasting, and the next couple of years really will set in stone on what's happening and where we're headed with this. Rob, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's been great.
I want to remind all our viewers to check our show out. We are on the Zune. You can get all our information at our website, gfqnetwork.com. We also stream live each and every day. We're on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at gfqlive.tv. Also, remember to follow us. We're on Twitter, twitter.com/GFQ and on Facebook, facebook.com/Guys from Queens. And we'll see you all next week on What the Tech. Good night, everybody.